A clay tablet sits in a European museum archive. The man who carved it was a professional Sumerian sky watcher, trained for decades, accountable to a king. His system had a name for every sign the moon produced: halos, eclipses, conjunctions, strange colours at the lunar rim, all classified, all assigned a meaning, all transmissible to the palace before dawn. Then, in what appear to be his final entries, he recorded something his system had no name for. A second brightness beside the moon, not a metaphor, not a prayer, a field observation written twice with no prediction attached. Subscribe now. The city of maintained its sky watchers the way it maintained its granaries, as a matter of state survival. These were not priests composing hymns to the moon. They were trained civil servants whose job was to read the sky accurately, completely, and without embellishment, then report what they found to the palace before it became relevant. The consequences of failure were institutional and visible. Mesopotamia kept meticulous records of everything: grain delivered, silver owed, land boundaries disputed, tribute received. Astronomical error entered the same archive as all the rest. Get a lunar omen wrong, and the record would show it. The tradition did not forgive improvisation. The system they served had been accumulating for centuries before the scribe whose tablet concerns us was born. Scholars call it Enuma Anu Enlil, a vast celestial omen series that classified every observable irregularity in the sky and assigned each one a meaning for the king and the land. The full series eventually ran to roughly 70 tablets. The moon alone occupied the first 23. That proportion is not an accident. Of all the celestial bodies the Mesopotamian sky watchers tracked, the moon was understood to be the most consequential, the most communicative, and the most dangerous to misread. What the lunar section of Enuma Anu Enlil catalogued was exhaustive. Halos around the moon, rings of diffused light produced by ice crystals in the upper atmosphere, were recorded with specific attention to which stars or planets appeared inside the ring, because position altered meaning. A halo encircling Jupiter carried a different prediction than a halo encircling Saturn. Colour mattered. A reddish halo predicted different consequences than a pale one. Eclipses received the most elaborate treatment of any lunar event. The month of occurrence, the direction from which shadow entered the lunar disk, the point at which totality began, the colour the moon turned during darkness, all of it classified, all of it indexed to a specific outcome for the king or state. Scholars of the corpus note that some eclipse entries run to several lines of cuneiform, passing minute observational differences that a modern reader might consider negligible. The scribe who trained in this system learned, above all, that the sky was not mysterious, it was legible. Every anomaly had a name, and every name had a history of correlations behind it. Decades of observation matched against political record, flood record, harvest record. Not mysticism, not mythology, not the invention of frightened priests staring at the dark. A pattern-matching system built from empirical work, and the scribes who maintained it understood themselves to be doing something rigorous. This is what makes the anomaly entry so disorienting. A scribe who had internalized this tradition for 40 years knew the rules better than almost anyone alive. He knew what halos looked like and what words the corpus used for them. He knew what a bright planet in conjunction with the moon produced in the sky and in the text. He knew the standard grammatical structure of an omen entry. If the moon does X, then Y will come to pass for the king or the land. He knew that deviation from that structure was a flag, a signal to any senior scribe reviewing the archive that something had gone wrong, either in the observation or in the recording. He would not have improvised language without cause. The training did not permit it. His professional standing depended on the completeness and accuracy of what he left behind. Every tablet he had produced before this one carried the weight of that accountability, pressed into the clay in the fixed terminology of a tradition that had been speaking the same language for generations. What he encountered at the end of his life was something that language could not hold. A standard lunar omen entry from the period reads like this: "If the moon at its appearance wears a crown and its right horn is long, the king of Akkad will become powerful and his army will be strong." Brief, fixed, no personal voice. The scribe is absent from the text. What survives is the pattern and its meaning, stripped of the man who recorded it. This was the form. This was what the archive expected. The anomaly entry does not look like this. It opens with the standard date formula and the standard weather notation. Clear sky, full visibility, no cloud cover affecting observation. Then the standard opening phrase, "the moon at its appearance." Up to that point, the entry is indistinguishable from hundreds of others in the corpus. What follows it is not. The physical tablet itself carries a mark of what was happening to the man who made it. The impressions on the reverse face, where the anomaly entry sits, are shallower than those on the obverse, less evenly spaced. The wedge shapes are correct in form but reduced in depth, as though the hand pressing the stylus into wet clay was applying less force than it once had. Researchers who have examined the tablet describe this as consistent with deteriorating grip strength in an elderly or ill scribe. The hand did not change. The man behind it was running out of time. He pressed what he had seen into the clay anyway, in the only language available to him, and the language was not enough. The anomaly entry begins where the standard form ends. The date is recorded correctly. The weather notation is present. The opening phrase, "the moon at its appearance," matches dozens of other entries in the corpus without variation. Then the text shifts to a construction that scholars of the Enuma Anu Enlil tradition have spent years parsing. Beside it, a second brightness, not its face. The phrase breaks in two places. First, the word rendered as brightness, translated variously as light, gleam, or luminous body, depending on the scholar, is attested elsewhere in the Omen series, but always in reference to established celestial objects: the moon itself, Venus, a bright star near the horizon at twilight. Using it here, in conjunction with a negating phrase that explicitly distinguishes the object from the moon rather than describing a property of it, breaks the grammatical logic of a standard entry. The scribe is not recording something the moon is doing. He is recording something beside it. Second, the negating phrase itself, not its face, appears almost nowhere else in the corpus in this construction. Scholars of cuneiform astronomical texts note that the closest analogues appear in entries describing damaged or obscured lunar features, not in entries describing secondary objects. The scribe is reaching for vocabulary the system was not built to hold. The strain is visible in the syntax. He then does something with no parallel in the corpus. He records the observation a second time, in slightly different phrasing, immediately following the first entry. Not a correction, the first version is not struck through or marked for revision. Not a standard repetition which the Omen corpus does use in certain fixed formulaic contexts. This is a live re-recording of the same observation in altered words, as though changing the phrasing might bring the thing into a recognizable category the first attempt had failed to locate. It did not. The second version ends without a prediction, exactly as the first version does. The standard Omen structure requires a consequence clause, if X, then Y. Both entries are missing it, not truncated. The clay space was available. The consequence clause is simply absent, because the scribe had no tradition-sanctioned prediction to attach to what he had seen. 5 explanations have been proposed by researchers working on the tablet. The first is a lunar halo of unusual brightness. Halos are thoroughly documented in the Enuma Anu Enlil series. A particularly luminous example can create the visual impression of a secondary light source near the moon. Against this, the scribe had certainly recorded halos before. The corpus had specific fixed terminology for them. He used none of it here. The second explanation is a bright planet in close angular proximity to the moon. Venus, Jupiter and Mars all produce this effect, and close conjunctions are among the most common entries in the lunar omen record. Against this, planetary conjunctions had their own classification entries, and the scribe would have identified the planet by name. Not a single planet name appears. The third is a partial lunar eclipse seen through thin, high-altitude haze, which can produce the visual impression of a divided or doubled lunar disk. Against this, the phrasing explicitly excludes the interpretation that he was describing something happening to the moon. Not its face is a negation of identity, not a description of obscuration. The fourth is a bolide, a bright fragmenting meteor, visible near the moon at the moment of observation. Bolides appear in the corpus. Their entries emphasize motion, luminous trail, brief duration, and in some cases audible impact. The scribe records no motion, no trail, and no time limit on the observation. His entry reads as a sustained sighting, not a momentary event. The fifth explanation is textual, a damaged or miscopied phrase from an earlier omen record that the scribe was transcribing rather than observing directly. Against this, the other entries on the tablet show no signs of transcription from a prior source. The tablet reads as original field record throughout. The anomaly entry is the only section that breaks from the standard form, which is the opposite of what a transcription error typically produces. None of these explanations fails entirely, none succeeds entirely. The gap between what was seen and what the system could accommodate is exactly where the omen tradition's own predictions become relevant, because what the scribe recorded, taken as a genuine field observation, mapped directly onto one of the most serious categories his tradition recognized. A second luminescence beside the moon was not a neutral sign. The closest analogous entries in the Enuma Anu Enlil series treated unusual secondary brightness near the lunar disk as a marker of instability at the highest level of state. The death of the reigning king, rebellion within the court or army, the failure of the seasonal flood, the advance of an enemy from an unexpected direction. These were specific predictions. They named particular calamities, particular months, particular directions from which consequences would arrive. The omen tradition worked by compression, a large meaning packed into a small observed irregularity, transmitted to the palace, acted upon. The scribe knew all of this. He had transmitted such omen predictions for decades. The historical record from the relevant period is not silent. Administrative documents from the city and surrounding region show a pattern of institutional stress in the years immediately following the tablet's composition. Land grants disrupted mid-transfer, temple ration lists shortened without recorded explanation, correspondence between cities that had previously been routine going quiet. None of this constitutes proof that the omen was fulfilled. Administrative disruption is common in any period for dozens of reasons that have nothing to do with lunar signs or dying scribes. But the pattern is there. The years immediately following the anomaly entry show a kingdom absorbing something, not catastrophic, not a clean break in the material record, but real and documented in clay. What the omen tradition would have predicted for a sign of this class was specific: royal instability, enemy advance, flood failure, epidemic. Whether any of those outcomes arrived cannot be confirmed against a single entry made by a single observer. What can be confirmed is that the entry was transmitted. The archive did not stop when the scribe did. When a palace scribe died, his tablets were reviewed, organized, and in many cases copied for preservation or transmission to other observation centers. The anomaly entry was copied. Researchers have identified what appears to be a later transcription of the relevant section, made by a different hand, in which the entry is reproduced with the unusual phrasing retained almost verbatim, not corrected, not flagged, not appended with a marginal note questioning whether the original scribe had erred or improvised. The later scribe copied the entry and moved forward through the tablet without comment. This is the fossilization problem. The Enuma Anu Enlil tradition was already old by the period we are discussing. Some of its entries preserved observations and terminology from centuries earlier. formulas that had become standard without anyone being entirely certain what the original observation had described. The system accumulated. It did not prune. An entry that had outlived the context producing it still occupied its place in the archive, still received copying, still travelled between institutions, because removing it would have required deciding it was wrong, and the tradition had no formal mechanism for that judgment. Completeness was the discipline. The archive was the authority. So the anomaly entry moved forward in time the way certain entries always did, as a locked box copied faithfully by hands that may not have held the key. A description of something beside the moon, with no name and no prediction, carried through the tradition because the tradition carried everything. What comes after it on the original tablet is a closing formula, a short phrase that appears at the end of several complete sky diary tablets from the period, administrative punctuation, the scribal equivalent of drawing a final line under an account. It is not a personal statement. There is no last word from the scribe himself, no explanation of what he believed he had seen, no indication of whether he had reported the observation to the palace or recorded it in the archive and said nothing. The formula ends the tablet ends the record. Every classification system has a boundary. The edge is not always clearly marked, not with a warning, not with a gap in the clay. Sometimes a practitioner reaches it and finds something on the other side that the system was not built to hold, not mythology, not error, not a gap in training, but a genuine encounter with something the taxonomy had not yet learned to name. What the scribe did at that boundary was the only thing the tradition prepared him to do. He recorded it, in the fixed language of a system that could not contain it, pressed into wet clay that would outlast him by 4,000 years, addressed to no one in particular, and to whoever came after with better tools. That is not mysticism. It is a particular kind of professional honesty, the acknowledgement that the archive is not the world, that the world occasionally produces something the archive has not yet learned to hold, and that the correct response is to record it anyway and trust the system to carry it forward. We still build these systems, we still reach their edges, we still find things there that the current vocabulary cannot fully absorb, and we still face the same choice the scribe faced, whether to force the observation into an existing category or to record it as it appeared and leave the naming to whoever comes next. The tablet sits in a museum collection. You can request to see it. Most people do not. It looks like what it is, a small rectangle of fired clay covered in marks that require years of specialized training to read. The reverse face, where the impressions are slightly shallower, holds the entry. The closing formula follows it. Then the clay is blank. The scribe recorded what he saw. He could not name it. He left it in the archive anyway. The night sky kept its secret. The clay kept his. If you want more ancient mysteries that the record almost forgot, subscribe now.